everyone, it's Dr. Hayes, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about Wuthering Heights, specifically the newest adaptation by Fennel, starring Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi, and I've actually never seen any adaptation of Wuthering Heights before. This was my first one. What a first one to start off with, God. So with that, we'll just get into the disclaimers. Firstly, I'm only going to be comparing this version of the film to the novel by Emily Bronte. I won't be really mentioning any other adaptation apart from one instance of Wuthering Heights, because one, I don't think it's fair, and two, I haven't seen them anyway, so I can't. Number two is that this is not going to be a spoiler-free review for either the film or the book. I'm going to spoil everything about them, so if you want to read it or watch it before, don't watch this video because nothing will be kept from you. And of course, I wish I didn't have to say it, but I think I need to. Everything I'm going to express in this video is my own opinion. If you disagree with me, that's completely fine. I would never expect anyone to 110% agree with me on everything I say, so it's fine to disagree with me as long as you're respectful about it in the comments. I truly don't mind. Just please don't be rude. You can have your own opinion without insulting other people. Thank you in advance. So the way I'm going to do this video is I'm going to do some like overall thoughts about the film. Then I'm going to go into more specific things like Heathcliff and Kathy and Joseph and Isabella and like the missing second half, but I will chapter mark it so you can skip around if you don't want to watch all of it. So let's just get into my overall thoughts on the film. So, was the film good? In my opinion, no. Even ignoring for a moment that this was based on a book, even if I switch off my brain and pretend Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte never existed, I still don't think it was a very good film. However, that being said, I also don't think I should have to turn my brain off. Like recently I covered this situation on TikTok where this book talker, Maddie, was talking about like we should demand more from the media we're consuming, specifically books. She was talking about books, and I absolutely think she's right. I want to demand more from the art I'm consuming, and transforming Wuthering Heights, when you boil it down to its absolute basics, is about a man who is abused and made into basically a slave, and when the final straw is he can't be with the woman he loves due to their class difference and his race, he begins to exact revenge on both the Earnshaws and Lintons, creating a path of destruction over generations so they can feel just a fraction of the trauma he experienced. So taking that and just turning it into a steamy romance, honestly, in my opinion, does make this film seem an incredibly hollow and shallow adaptation of the book. Now, what I'm not saying is that I'm against sex on screen. I watch Bridgerton. I love Bridgerton, alright? It would be extremely hypocritical of me to say I hated it just because there was sex. I just felt that instead of the film being about trauma, which is what Wuthering Heights is about, the book version, the actual version, it became about sex instead. So while as a general statement, I have no problem with sex being in books, in films, in TV. Like at the minute I'm reading Heated Rivalry, okay? This is me and my colleagues' buddy read for the month. She picked this, okay? I have no problem with that existing in the media I consume. However, in the book of Wuthering Heights, Kathy and Heathcliff's relationship is full of the yearning between them, because one, they can't be together, and two, it's also narrated by Nelly. She's not in the relationship with them, so you don't get to see a great deal of Kathy and Heathcliff together because it's told from Nelly's perspective, not from Kathy's perspective or Heathcliff, it's told from Nelly's perspective. And the whole point of their relationship is that they want each other, but they can't be together, and they end up tormenting each other, and Kathy basically torments him even after she dies, to the point he basically goes and digs up her dead body. Like, it's full of the yearning and the torment between them, and the fact they can't actually be together, and all the tension that creates. And I do feel all of that is lost in the film, because like, oh no, we can't be together, and then they get together anyway. Like, I understand, like, it's not like properly official, she's still married to Edgar when they get together, but like, they still have a romantic relationship, so it's like all of that tension and the yearning is completely lost because they did get together. And I also want to add here that I never expect an adaptation of any kind to be a one-for-one replica of the book. I understand that what works in a book in terms of structure and pacing and certain plot points doesn't always translate well to screen. I 100% get that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. At the minute I'm also watching the adaptation of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. I think there's, at the time of filming, 1 episode left, or maybe just 1 episode I haven't seen yet. Honestly, it is pretty faithful, however there are a lot of added in flashbacks that aren't in the book. To be fair though, the first story in the book is basically Dunk wandering around the tourney and meeting people. Not much happens, honestly, until the big fight of the 7v7 at the end. However, I don't mind that those flashbacks have been added in, and it is straying away from the source material when it does that, because they work in terms of what we see on screen. It stays true to the characters and the themes of the book, and also adds a lot more to Dunk's character. So yes, it does stray away from the book, but I do think what we get with those flashbacks are also really great additions. So whilst A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms adaptation does stray away from the book, I really don't mind, because where it does stray away from the book I think are really great additions to add to the characters and the story, and it does stay faithful to the overall themes of the piece without straying too far and making it something else entirely. Do you get what I mean? I don't expect it to be a one-for-one replica of page to screen, the exact same lines of dialogue used, but I do expect it to be somewhat similar, especially as, in my opinion, it is being marketed as a faithful adaptation of Wuthering Heights. And I know a lot of people are going to say to that, oh no, actually it's actually being marketed as a loose adaptation, it's just kind of inspired by Wuthering Heights. I work in a bookshop and we are selling copies of Wuthering Heights with Margot Robbie's and Jacob Elordi's faces on them, and the font used for the film title. If you're doing that, then this tells me that this is being marketed as a pretty faithful adaptation of the book if you're going to put their faces on a classic novel, despite the quotation marks around the title. Like, to me, that means it's being marketed as a faithful adaptation. If it wasn't, they wouldn't bother. So I just can't get behind the idea this is meant to be a loose adaptation when their face is on the actual book. So I do think it's more than valid to critique the film against said novel when their faces are on it. I think doing your own take in a classic novel is absolutely a fine thing to do, but you should probably call it something else. For example, 10 Things I Hate About You is an adaptation of Taming of the Shrew, but because I knew it was going to be quite different, they called it something else. However, 10 Things I Hate About You still keeps the themes of Taming of the Shrew. The themes in Taming of the Shrew are romance, misogyny and deceits, and 10 Things I Hate About You has those exact same themes. Wuthering Heights' main themes are trauma and revenge, and while there is technically romance in the book, it does largely take a backseat. As I said before, it's narrated by Nelly, she's not in this relationship. So the romance that doesn't really exist in the book is brought forward in the film as the most prominent theme. I wouldn't have said there was a great deal of trauma in the film. There is some, don't get me wrong, but there's not loads, at least not in comparison to how much trauma there is in the book. And it's certainly not to the same extent as in the book either, especially since the second half of it is missing. And while there is revenge, the revenge in the book is, I would describe it as like financial revenge, whereas in the film it's more sexual revenge. So when you change those themes, remove several key characters like Hindley, who forms the basis of Heathcliff's trauma, and completely change other characters, the movie does become honestly unrecognisable from the book. And it's certainly odd to say that 10 Things I Hate About You is a better adaptation of The Taming of the Shrew than this version of Wuthering Heights is of Wuthering Heights, when 10 Things I Hate About You is set in American high school. You know what I mean? Like, it's really, really different. But it's still closer to The Taming of the Shrew than this version of Wuthering Heights is to Wuthering Heights, which is honestly insane to say. Now, one thing I'm not saying is that Emerald Fennel couldn't do her own take on it. Some things I did like from the film was when it was more subversive. For example, the when she moves in after she's got married, the skin room to show how obsessed Edgar was with Kathy. However, I do feel that idea fell a little flat since you don't really get to see a great deal of Kathy and Edgar interacting before they get married, or after they get married actually. I also really like the dolls and the dollhouse, like Wuthering Heights, like when you actually saw the actual house for the first time. I did think from the outside it looked very artificial, kind of a bit like a doll's house, and I would assume that the dollhouse theming was to show the control men have over women at the time it's set, and also indeed now. And I definitely think that idea could have been furthered, since the metaphor does seem to be forgotten about at times, and I do also think they would fit with the other themes of Wuthering Heights, especially since Cathy thinks that marrying Edgar will allow her to help Heathcliff, but it won't. She's just moving from being controlled in one doll's house to another. So I do think thematically those things make sense to do. Just overall, I just don't think they committed well enough to those ideas, and I didn't find the film very enjoyable at all, both as a film and also as a book adaptation. I just didn't think it was very good. And I also want to briefly touch on the wardrobe choices here. I won't go on too much because I want to focus more about the story and the characters, but I just wanted to mention it. I don't know how historically accurate some of the outfits were. Okay, I have no clue. And I won't pretend I do know. But the only one who definitely wears more modern clothing is Cathy, and arguably Isabella, but only in that scene where Cathy pulls her hair. I think the thinking there is that Isabella recognises that Heathcliff likes Cathy, so she's like, oh, if I dress like Cathy, then he'll like me too. But unless my memory is failing me, I've only seen the film once, but it was yesterday afternoon. So while I don't mind some historically inaccurate fashion, like I said, I watch Bridgerton. I'd be a massive hypocrite if I if I cared about it for this, but not for that. In Bridgerton, as far as I'm aware, everyone is wearing historically inaccurate outfits, so it works because it's consistent. But when only Margot Robbie is wearing the modern clothing, it just looks a little bit odd. Is it possibly a metaphor about her again being in this doll's house, that she's just a thing to dress up? Like for example, they say like Isabella sacrificed her ribbon room for it, and like she's the one who ordered all these dresses for Cathy. Maybe. I'm not really sure, since again I don't think it was done well enough. I like the idea of the doll's house stuff and the control, but I just don't think it was portrayed well enough in the film. So I'm not really sure what the point of it was, because even though I did like a lot of the dresses, especially the ones that Cathy wore, and I loved all the red they used for her, I just felt it looked really off because she was the only one who seemed to be wearing modern clothing. If everyone had been doing it, wearing a mix of kind of more period pieces and then modern stuff, I'd have no problem with it. But it just looks really out of place when she's the only one doing it, you know what I mean? So that's all I've got to say generally. Basically, I don't really like any of it apart from a couple of things. But let's get more specific now. So we're going to start with Heathcliff first because I feel like we have to. You'll understand why in a minute. So Heathcliff was played by Jacob Elordi. I've never actually seen Jacob Elordi in anything before. I was talking to my brother about this last night. He was like, you've not seen Euphoria or The New Frankenstein or The Kissing Booth? And I was like, no. None of those. I am notoriously bad at watching anything. Even though I love Bridgerton, I still haven't seen the most recent season. I've even bought the snacks for it ready to sit down and have a binge session. I don't often binge TV shows, I'm really bad at binging. So even though I have the snacks and I have the time and I'm ready to go, I'm just like, no. I'm really bad at watching things. So this is my first time seeing him in something, but honestly I did think he did a good job in the film. I think he acted well in the film, and I thought his accent was pretty good. I'm not from Yorkshire, I'm from Lancashire, but I'm well accustomed to what the accent sounds like. No, this isn't a Lancashire accent, this is just my regular voice. I can do a Lancashire accent, but most people don't like it, so I usually don't use one. So I did think he did a good job. If you want to know a good example of a Yorkshire accent, if you know Sean Bean, he's from Yorkshire, the actor. However, that being said, even though I did think he did a good job, I don't think he ever should have been cast in the first place, because Heathcliff isn't white, and I've seen people online trying to argue that he is white, and I'm just confused as to what version of the book they have read to reach that conclusion. I do think it's pretty clear that that man is not white. So in the book there are lines such as dark-skinned gypsy in aspect, a little lascar or an American or Spanish castaway. If you don't know what lascar means, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It means a sailor from India or Southeast Asia. It's a gypsy brat. You're fit for a prince in disguise. Who knows, but your father was Emperor of China and your mother an Indian queen. And more evidence for Heathcliff not being white is the fact he was found in Liverpool. If you don't know where Liverpool is, it is in Merseyside. It's a city in the UK. It's pretty sizable, and it's also on the waterfront, and it was a big, huge port for the slave trade because of where it is located. So while I don't know what race Heathcliff is exactly and what country he's from exactly, I do think it's honestly clear that he's not white. I do think it is purposely kept ambiguous because it doesn't really matter what colour his skin is. It's just because that he's not white, which then forms the basis for his treatment from Hindley, teamed with how his dad favours Heathcliff, which then feeds into how he's treated by Edgar, which then feeds into the revenge he exacts in the second half of the book. And we will get to the missing second half of the book, don't worry. But I just don't know how you could cast Jacob Elordi, or anyone who is white, no matter how good of an actor they are, for this role, when his race forms the basis of his character and the whole trajectory he takes through the course of the story, which is why something Emerald Fennel said is so odd. At the film's premiere, Emerald Fennel was outright asked about the casting of Jacob Elordi in what is obviously supposed to be a role for a man of colour. I think the thing is, everyone who loves this book has such a personal connection to it, and so you can only ever kind of make the movie that you sort of imagined yourself when you read it. She responded, I don't know, I think I was sort of focusing on the kind of sadomasochistic elements of it. That's the great thing about this movie, is that it could be made every year and it would still be so moving and so interesting. Like, what version of this book did she read that first of all stopped when Cathy died and secondly skipped over all mentions of Heathcliff's race so that she didn't imagine him as a person of colour? So while I did like Jacob Elordi in the film, I did think he did do a great job and I did think his accent was great, I don't think he ever should have played this part. And now we're moving on to Catherine, and honestly I feel really mixed about Catherine. For some parts of the film I felt like Margot Robbie's emotional reactions were very exaggerated and pantomime-esque, and I'm not really sure why. So for example, do you know the bit where Heathcliff puts her on a tree when she's being annoying and she just starts gasping? I'm like, chill out, it's not that high up. It was just really over the top, I didn't really get why. And then when they trying to get wood for the fire, so Heathcliff starts breaking apart a chair, and the gasping she does then is just really over exaggerated, and I ended up finding it quite funny. And I wasn't the only one. When I was in the cinema yesterday, other people were laughing with me. Like, Wuthering Heights isn't meant to be funny. I was just like, oh, this is hilarious. Also, her portrayal in the film as just like a character was odd. In the book, and perhaps I also, like Emerald Fennel, read it incorrectly, I viewed Cathy as mischievous and full of childlike whimsy, and while she doesn't make the best decisions always, those decisions aren't really made with malice. And I think child Cathy in the film was a lot closer to the book, in my opinion, than adult Cathy was in the film. Like, in the film, adult Cathy is just horrible to Isabella. She's also horrible to Nelly. Do you know the scene where, so she goes to Nelly, she's like, okay, Edgar's asked me to marry him. I said yes. Do you think I made the right decision? And she starts being really rude to Nelly, and Nelly's like, what do you want from me? And she's like, some kindness and compassion. And I'm like, you've just sat on the floor and been really rude to Nelly and you want her to be kind to you? No! Get out! I have nothing against Margot Robbie. I think she's a lovely person. I think I've only seen her in Barbie and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, so I haven't seen tons of things she's been in, but I really like her. I think she's lovely. I do also wish that this role had been played by someone who was from Yorkshire, which may sound like a bit of a weird thing to say, particularly if you're not British, but please let me explain for a moment. So in the UK, specifically in England, we have this thing called the North-South divide, where basically the north of the country is significantly poorer than the south of the country. Now, of course, that is a very general sweeping statement. There are areas of the south that are in poverty, and there are areas in the north that are quite prosperous, like Liverpool and like Manchester, for example, but just by and large, that is how the wealth is distributed in this country. So if you want to know more about it, I would recommend the book The North Will Rise Again by Alex Niven. It is an excellent, excellent book. And this geographic divide of wealth absolutely does cross over into the arts. When researching arts-related career pathways, I found that the offerings in the north of the country were limited when compared to an abundance of opportunities in the south. As a resident of the north, I feel that this imbalance in opportunity to work in an arts-related sector, such as costume design or TV and film production, should be explored. Opportunity for growth in the arts sector could drastically improve the economic outlook in the north and provide many jobs and further opportunities. The arts have had a significant impact on my life, giving me confidence and a passion in life. I believe the arts are capable of wonders. Music can lift the spirit, artworks can protest against political issues, and theatre can demonstrate and shed light on injustice in society. The possibilities the arts have are endless, so shouldn't everyone get to experience them with equal opportunity? The arts in the South are developed and well known. For example, the West End is known globally for its theatres and musical productions. London is the centre of the art scene and is also well renowned for a multitude of museums and galleries, such as the V&A and National Portrait Gallery, and music performance spaces. The arts in the South are well known and publicly displayed almost everywhere you look. The arts in the South are also allocated more funding than arts in the North. For example, the Arts Council fund doubles the number of the projects in the South as it does in the North. This leads to greater education around the arts as they are more prominent in society, which then leads to more interest and consequently more investment. It is a positive multiplier cycle or virtuous circle. Now, that is not to say there are no opportunities here in the North for the arts. For example, TV shows like Coronation Street and Emmerdale are filmed in the North. Media City is located in Salford, where I'm pretty sure they film BBC News and things like. Is This Morning filmed at Media City? I'm not even sure. Waterloo Road is also filmed in the North. Actually, one of the trailers for Wuthering Heights yesterday was this film called, I think it was called Finding Emily, which looks like it's set in Manchester. So there definitely are opportunities, but like the article said, if you compare that to places around London, it is absolutely not the same. For example, another thing with the arts is I work in a bookshop in the North, and we get significantly less signings than bookshops down in the South, as in signings from authors, because again, the majority of published authors in the country are southern. They live in the south of the country and they do not want to travel up to the north of the country to do signings. It doesn't matter how many fans they have at those areas, a lot of them will just point blank refuse to, because they don't want to travel that far. Like, that's not even getting into what's going on in Wales with their economic divide, and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. But just in terms of opportunity and equality, just on a geographic basis in England, and not even getting into equality based on race or disability or gender, but just based on geography, England is a very, very divided country. So while in general, I do like Margot Robbie, and I think she did the best she could with this awful script, I can't help but wish the majority of the roles in this film had gone to people from Yorkshire, where the book is set, where the book is written. Haworth is in Yorkshire, and it's a book about people from Yorkshire. So I just wish that had been the case. But perhaps it's maybe too much to expect Emerald Fennel to know about this issue. I am Northern, I'm from Lancashire, not Yorkshire, but they're next door to each other. Perhaps this is a bigger issue to me because it does directly affect me. It has affected me for my entire life. And Emerald Fennel, I'm pretty sure, was born either in London or near London, and went to Marlborough College, which is the same school that Kate Middleton attended, a very posh school. So maybe this issue of the North-South divide isn't on her radar, which is why she hired an Australian to play a woman from Yorkshire, which is also reflected in how lower class people are depicted in the film at the start. And yeah, I get why Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi were picked, because they are big names, but I do think at the very least Kathy's role should have been played by someone from Yorkshire. Which brings me on to my next point. Why on earth did Kathy not have a Yorkshire accent? Like, they weren't a part of like high society or whatever. Like, they were rich-ish, but they weren't particularly posh. So why does she sound so posh? I don't know, maybe I could maybe see the argument. Like, I'm not too caught up on the fact that she didn't have a Yorkshire accent. I can get past it, but I was just a bit like, why didn't she? They're not a particularly posh family, so why does she talk like that? You know what I mean? So I was just a bit like, okay. I wish she had a Yorkshire accent, and that someone from Yorkshire had played her as well. So now let's talk about Nelly. And one thing I really didn't mind with this film actually is that it wasn't like narrated by her. Honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of books that tell their stories like that, so I didn't mind seeing it play out like in real time, so to speak. However, I was just baffled because she basically ends up becoming the villain. So in the book, Hindley is the villain at the start of the book, whose treatment of Heathcliff basically transforms Heathcliff into the villain by the end of it. Whereas in the film, so Mr. Earnshaw takes Hindley's place since Hindley is dead. But instead of Heathcliff becoming the villain, and don't get me wrong, he is villainous due to how he treats Isabella, but by the end of the film, Nelly is the one who is framed as the villain. However, I just really struggle to get behind that idea. It's not as if Kathy is totally innocent, and I'm not saying she deserved what happened to her, absolutely not. But I also get why Nelly did what she did. Like in that scene I mentioned before, after Kathy accepts Edgar's proposal, And Kathy's like, oh, show me some kindness. And I'm like, no, you've been so rude to her. And then later on, she tries to, you know, force Nelly out, tell her to get a new job. Don't get me wrong, Nelly wasn't perfect. I'm pretty sure it's implied that Nelly is the one who tells Edgar, like, hey, your wife is seeing this man. But I just can't get behind Nelly as the villain, because often a lot of what she does in the film is just returning Kathy's actions back to her. She does the exact same thing back. Again, I'm not saying what Nelly does in the film is okay, but I just struggle to get behind her as a villain, especially in the end when Kathy is dying. Because obviously I know they have that conversation where Kathy's like, oh yeah, the baby's gone, and she's like, have you bled? She's like, no. He's like, okay, well the baby's fine. However, like, in that sequence of the film, Kathy has just gone seemingly completely delusional once she finds out that Heathcliff has eloped with Isabella. She just completely loses all sense of herself and life, basically. So honestly, I can't really blame Nelly for not believing Kathy when she says that, because she's honestly kind of insane by that point. Like, so I do struggle to believe that Nelly was being horrible, that she didn't check to see if Kathy really was pregnant still or not. I just feel like a lot of things in this film, it just lacked the commitment for it to actually work. Because I do think it is possible you could have made her the villain, but they just didn't follow it through enough, which is a lot of problems that I'm having with the film, is they start doing something, but then they just don't follow through with the idea. They just kind of like, oh yeah, we'll just leave that there. No, do something. And now we're going to talk about Isabella. Okay, first of all, she is Edgar's ward, not his sister. Fine, I can get behind that change. That's the least of my problems here. So, and it does actually kind of follow her journey in the book. So she develops basically an ill-advised crush on Heathcliff, and she ends up eloping with him. However, in the book, Heathcliff does abuse Isabella in their marriage. Again, we don't see it firsthand because it's narrated by Nelly, but it's implied he abuses and manipulates her, including possibly also raping her, and he also hangs her dog. So to take that, Isabella, a victim of Heathcliff's abuse, and make her abuser in the film, but have her enjoy it basically, I find so incredibly disgusting and honestly quite misogynistic, which possibly sounds a little bit weird to say of a woman, of Emerald Fennel. However, I do believe you can be a woman and also be misogynistic. One of the most misogynistic people I've ever known was my grandma. She has since died, but she was from like about the age of like 14, 15, started to become extremely misogynistic to me. So I definitely do think you can be female and also be misogynistic. And it was just a really strange choice, honestly, considering she is abused in the book by Heathcliff. However, I do feel there is another layer to this. So the way Alison Oliver played Isabella, in my opinion, was as neurodivergent. I am autistic, and to me she did come across as autistic. I did have a look up to see if Alison Oliver was indeed autistic. I couldn't find anything. Honestly, I don't really care if she is or isn't. That's not my problem here. But as an autistic woman myself, I just found it so degrading and offensive to see her be manipulated like that, to have Heathcliff take advantage of her so much and have her act like a dog, which he hanged in the book, and have her enjoy it. I just thought it was absolutely awful, particularly when that dog meant so much to her. And yeah, I get that autistic people are manipulated easily. It's happened to me before. I understand. I won't pretend it doesn't happen. But to have that abuse twisted and put on her like that was just so vile, in my opinion. Like I said, especially since he made her act like a dog, when her dog was something she clearly cared for, and also Heathcliff did something horrific to that dog in the book. It honestly made me feel sick. I was at the cinema, I was eating snacks as I did, I was eating some chocolate, and when that scene happened, when she started barking, I did physically feel sick and I had to stop eating because I was like, if I don't stop, I'm literally gonna throw up right here in the cinema. Like, I don't class myself as getting offended easily. My PhD is in suicide prevention. I have seen and read a lot of things for 3.5 years straight that other people wouldn't be okay with. You have to be a certain type of person to decide to do your PhD, which can be pretty full on in something like suicide because it is a heavy topic. Not everyone is able to do a PhD in a topic like that. But honestly, at that scene, I would have left the cinema at that point if I hadn't been making this video. If I'd just gone to see it just for fun or whatever, because I went with the intention of making this video. I'd already made some notes before I left for the cinema. But honestly, the scene did disgust me. I get that even though Isabella, even if she wasn't neurodivergent, she is very sheltered. Like when she sees Kathy at the garden wall, she's petrified. She's like, oh my god, it was a monster. And she also has no reference for a relationship other than Kathy and Edgar, who don't seem to have a very healthy one. But honestly, I did feel really disgusted by that scene, and I'm just baffled why Emerald Fennel thought it was a good choice to take this victim of abuse and do that to her and think it was a good idea. I don't get it, and I don't think I ever will. So now we're going to move on to Earnshaw / kind of Hindley. So like I said before, Hindley in the book kind of kickstarts all of this, but he dies apparently, I'm assuming in childbirth, along with Kathy's mother. I don't know, no one ever says. Except he's not called Hindley, he is called Heathcliff, which in a child's perspective, from child Kathy's perspective, of course she has no idea she is going to grow up and fall in love with him. However, the audience knows she does, and Emerald Fennel knows she does, since, you know, this is her film. And since that doesn't happen in the original book, because Hindley is alive and was never called Heathcliff in the first place, it's just an odd and slightly incestuous choice to have her name him Heathcliff, her dead brother's name. But okay. So while I think Martin Clunes, who was basically doubling up as Earnshaw and Hindley at the same time, whilst I did think he did a great job playing Earnshaw, this man who drinks too much and gambles away their fortune and abuses his children, it seems Earnshaw's treatment of Heathcliff doesn't really form any part of why Heathcliff leaves. Like I said, in the book, Hindley dislikes Heathcliff because 1, he's not white, and 2, his father favours Heathcliff over him. Hindley eventually gets sent away to school and returns when his father dies. And now the master of the house, he basically turns Heathcliff into their slave, furthering this barbaric treatment of Heathcliff. And the final straw making him ultimately leave is overhearing Kathy say marrying him would degrade her. Whereas in the film, unless I'm misremembering, it seems Earnshaw harms Heathcliff the once that night they are late for his birthday, and for whatever reason he just does a lot of manual labour. I don't know why he does it. He doesn't seem to hate it, he doesn't seem like he's forced into it. I'm not really sure. It's not really explored from what I remember. Like, I only saw it yesterday, and I guess I'm already trying to repress things because it was awful. But he's just like, yeah, I'll help around the house, and the help is like, again, very manual labour, but like he doesn't actually seem like he's forced to. I may be just misremembering it, but I was just like, okay. And then it seems he only leaves because of what he overhears Kathy saying. So like I said before, the main themes of Wuthering Heights are trauma and revenge, but because the main theme of the Wuthering Heights, the film, ends up being romance, and like 90% of the film is focused on that, then the trauma that Earnshaw inflicts on Heathcliff to make him the way he is, to take that revenge, does seem to be largely forgotten about. So would that have changed if Hindley was in the film instead, and the one doing the abuse? I don't know, I can't say what Emerald Fennel may have done instead, but it did seem that removing Hindley from the narrative shows that Emerald Fennel never had any intention of, at the very least, following the basic themes of the book, since Hindley does kickstart why Heathcliff becomes the villain by the end. So now we're going to talk about Edgar, and honestly, I don't have sorry my cat, I don't have a great deal to say about this man. In the book he's racist to Heathcliff, I didn't like him very much, you're not supposed to, but in the film I just felt really bad for him, which was odd considering how much I hate him in the book. Like, his wife is cheating on him and he was just trying to do his best. Honestly, I found him quite funny at different parts. Like his first scene with Isabella and she's recounting Romeo and Juliet, he's like, he was rather funny. So honestly, I'm not really sure how I feel about him. I think he was just trying to do his best. I quite liked him, which again, like I said, is weird because I don't like him in the book. And now we are moving on to Joseph. Joseph, poor man. He doesn't do a great deal in the film, but every time he came on screen, particularly for that sex scene, I was just like, why were these choices being made? So in the book, Joseph I don't know what he's saying at any point because he talks, I think, in a really strong Yorkshire dialect. But he's a very religious man and he's very old. I imagine him as like Filch from Harry Potter. And for some reason he's played by, I don't know, like a 30-year-old man who's having sex with Zilla in the barn with a harness that I think is meant for horses on her face. Like I said at the top of the video, I don't expect any adaptation of a book to be 100% accurate. But I don't know how you went from very religious old Yorkshire man to that. And it just again shows how the original themes of the book have been transformed from trauma and revenge to basically just romance and sex. I'm not saying you can't tell a story about those things. Like I said before, I'm reading Heated Rivalry. The whole thing is just pretty much about sex so far. What page am I on? 124. That's all it's about, sex and hockey. I read my own fair share of those kinds of stories. I definitely think there is a place for them. But I do think it's odd to take a book that never was about romance and sex and make it that way when there are books that are about that already in existence instead. Like, it's not as if Wuthering Heights isn't interesting as it already stands. Like, why didn't Emerald Fennel just find a period book that is already about romance and sex to adapt instead? Like, why? Honestly, the main word of this video is why. I dread to think how many times I've said it. So now the second half of the book. Because it just wasn't there, it was non-existent, and apparently I've heard, again, never seen these other adaptations, apparently most of them don't have it in either. Why? All of you, why? The only reason I can think of is I'm assuming it's because of Cathy. I get the biggest draw of Wuthering Heights for most people is Cathy and Heathcliff's relationship, and the second half of the book begins basically when she dies, so you do basically lose your female lead. However, I think this is part of the problem, is that when a lot of people think of Wuthering Heights, they think romance, and they are correct-ish, but to me, Wuthering Heights, if it is a romance, it's a romance between Cathy, as in Cathy's daughter Cathy, and I think it's pronounced Hareton. I don't actually know. I was like, oh, I'll get to find out how to pronounce this man's name, but I don't. Am I saying it correctly? I don't know. Is it pronounced differently? I don't know. But they usually think the romance is between the original Cathy and Heathcliff, when to me, like I've already said, boiled down to one word, Wuthering Heights is a story of revenge, not romance. And I do feel revenge is a better word for their relationship anyway. But I really feel the female lead in a Wuthering Heights adaptation should actually be Nelly, not Cathy. Again, like I already said, I'm not the biggest fan of the narration style stories, but she is technically the lead female character, even if she's not the most popular female character in it. And I do think it should be focused on her and telling the story through her eyes, so that by the point Cathy does die, which by the point when I read it I didn't want Heathcliff and Cathy to be together anyway because of how he was treating her, the second half can continue without losing interest because Nelly, the actual female lead, is still there, and by now your focus has shifted to Heathcliff's revenge on the children, on the descendants of those who did him wrong in the first place, and eventually the eventual romance between Cathy and Hareton. But again, even the revenge aspect isn't fully realised in the film either. Like I said before, in the book it's more of financial revenge, in the film it's more of sexual revenge, but the revenge is very short-lived, and they keep saying, you know, like, oh, we can't be together, but then they are together. And in the book, part of the torment between them is because they actually can't be together. They don't get together in the book at all, not even for 2 seconds. It's a never sort of thing. But in the film, it does seem pointless and all that tension is broken when they keep having sex with each other. And Heathcliff at the end of the film also very quickly forgives Cathy. Like, the only time the revenge is taking place is with Isabella, who also seems to be really enjoying the revenge anyway. So it all comes across as just really unsatisfying and hollow, and what I'm saying is basically, it would have been better if you just followed the book. Like, a huge part of the narrative in Wuthering Heights is Heathcliff being tormented by Cathy, even after she dies, to the point he goes to dig up her grave. I never truly felt, while watching it, that he was truly tormented by Cathy. Cathy seemed a lot more tormented by him. He just seemed really sadistic, honestly. So, in conclusion, as a film, I thought it was terrible. As a book adaptation specifically, I thought it was even worse than terrible. I felt like I was watching a film made of a Wattpad fanfiction of Wuthering Heights. And please note I am using the word Wattpad as an insult here. If I wanted to be nice I would have said AO3. Like, I love fanfiction, but I do indeed hate Wattpad. And at this point I'm just like, if you're going to ignore the book when you're going to adapt it, then just make something else. Or at the very least, don't advertise it with their faces slapped on the cover of the book. And I know people find it pretentious. I've seen so many posts over like the past like half a week saying like, well, if this adaptation is such an issue, such a problem for you, just go and read the book again. But like, the film doesn't even make sense even if it wasn't an adaptation. So I don't necessarily think it's a problem with, oh, go and reread the book. I never even want to see this film again because not only was it a bad adaptation, it was also a bad film. And honestly, I don't think it's pretentious to think critically about the media you're consuming and wanting to demand more from it, whether that's TV and film or books. And I also don't think it's pretentious to hope that an adaptation follows the basic themes of the source material. Like I said before, it does seem absolutely baffling to me that The 10 Things I Hate About You is a better adaptation of Taming of the Shrew than this version of Wuthering Heights is of Wuthering Heights when it's set in an American high school. Baffling to me. But anyway, that is just my opinion. I'd love to know what you think, particularly if you loved it. I would absolutely love to know why you liked it, because even as a film, even if I take the book away, I still think it's a bad film. It doesn't fully make sense. But anyway, that was just my opinion. Like I said at the start, you can absolutely express yours, even if you end up disagreeing with me. All I ask is that you are nice about it in the comments. You don't have to be rude to other people. So let us know what you think, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!